Right, let's take you back to our top story now. SAA's new equity partner raised 3 billion rand for a 51% stake in the airline. Public Enterprises Minister Pravin Gordhan says this will allow for a more agile, transformed and sustainable carrier. For more on this, we are joined by Joachim Vermooten, an aviation economist. Thank you very much, sir, for your time. Now, first of all, for this to work, I assume that, for instance, the board would have to also come from the private side of this partnership.
Good morning to you, all your viewers. Well, this is really the start of negotiations, as I see it, and there's a number of issues still to be sorted out. The main framework, at least, is that it will be private sector driven by people that are accustomed to normal investment criteria. So that is a plus. The actual details of the transaction will depend on the due diligences that will take place from both sides, and we still have to see what comes out of that. There's a number of outstanding issues. For example, there surely must be some rationalization or consolidation between SAA and Mango, and then probably Lift. And SAA technical is really infrastructural type of investment. And then we'll have to see how things are actually compelled to go further. But at least the fact that there is private sector views in the decision making is a plus.
So it's basically too early for us to start celebrating. That's what I'm getting from you, Mr. Vermooten. But also the due diligence part. Help me understand what happens if during this process of due diligence there is a disagreement. Does this mean the deal goes off the table?
Well, I think it depends on what the final terms would be. During such a process, obviously one finds things that doesn't suit you. And the parties will have to see whether they could get to some sort of understanding on that, So it's really the start of things, and we'll have to see how things progress.
So 3 billion rand raised by the consortium to be able to get this 51% on their side. 14 billion rand still needed, according to the Enterprises Minister, for this deal to go through from government side. This is costing us quite a lot of money. Still.
Yeah, the 14 billion really relates to the business rescue plan and government's responsibility in that regard. Of that, about 2 billion was earmarked for the relaunch of SAA. I don't know whether some of that has been used for current expenditure of the existing SAA staff that's retained or not. We'll have to see on that. And then 3 billion will be brought into the pot from the new investors. They have some relationship with the PIC, so at least the taxpayers is off the hook, but we'll have to see what the risk and the control is that eventually comes out of the negotiations.
So there's also, just for some understanding, the evaluation of subsidiaries, just for instance, the South African Airways Technical, which also has its own troubles outside of SAA. So if this also doesn't go well, what happens then? Do we also pause on the decision to actually have this partnership?
No, I think it will really, it's too early to tell, because both sides are just starting off with negotiations, and one will have to see what develops from that.
Mr. Vermooten, I know your cell phone's ringing, and that's what might be distracting you. But I just want to understand something as well. With the minister saying that SAA will no longer need a bailout from government, which was basically the thorn on our side for quite a long time. Government also owns 49%, while the private entity would own 51%. So what does government then pump in? What would be government's responsibility then if things do go through?
Well, they've earmarked the 2 billion for it, so plus the 3 billion by the new consortium would give a seed capital of about 5 billion. And so that's quite a substantial amount of money. but it would involve, sorting out a number of business issues, and we're actually waiting forward to see what the final terms of the transaction will be. So this is just the framework underneath which those investigations and discussions will take place. So it's very early in the process.
So does this then finally mean, if this deal does go through, would it finally mean that South Africa does not have a national carrier? We can't claim it as our own. Is that what it would mean?
No, one should remember that national carriers only reflect the national characteristics of a country. Most national carriers are no longer owned by the governments. For example, Lufthansa has a distinct German characteristics, British Airways UK characteristics, but neither of them are actually owned by governments. It's owned by listed companies, very large international companies, and that would be the case for South Africa as well.
All right. Mr. Joachim Vermooten, thank you very much, and thank you for also teaching me how to say your name. Thank you very much for your time. He is an aviation economist.